Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sandy Quinn with the Richard Nixon Foundation. Thank you for coming. Please join me in thanking this great group of Villa Park musicians. Led by their great musical conductor, Chuck Jay, who always supports us with wonderful prelude music, and today he's going to perform as part of our program as well. Thank you all for coming. We gather in this extraordinary environment of the East Room, which is the largest room in the White House, and the scene, the venue of so many important occasions as we feel this is today. We gather, as we've done every year, to commemorate and remember what happened on 9/11. But today it's more than that, because we're honoring Claudio Patino. Claudio went to El Dorado High School, graduated in 2006, joined the Marines, went to Iraq, came home, went in for a second tour of duty, and was killed on June 22nd at the age of 22. I knew this was going to happen. So I ask you to remain seated for a moment of silence while we seat the family. His wife, Jamie, his mother, Evelyn, and his father, Claudio. Now, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led by Ali Merrill, an Orange High School student whose dad is on active duty with Special Forces in Afghanistan. Ali. Face the flag to your right.
Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. And please remain standing. I feel better about myself now. Please remain standing for the presentation of the colors.
Ready, freeze and cook.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Let us thank those great young men from Gulf Command, 4th Marine Division Color Guard, and our terrific singer, Robbie Britt. Please be seated. Our good friend Bruce Herschensohn has brought a very special guest today who I would like to introduce. Ambassador Frank Shakespeare is a distinguished American indeed. He was president of CBS Television for 19 years. President Nixon named him director of the United States Information Agency. President Reagan named him ambassador to Portugal. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Shakespeare and his daughter Frederica. Thank you for coming, sir. Please. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our 9th annual program where we have tried to remember as best we can the tragedy of 9/11. The first year, shortly after it occurred, we did a program in our amphitheater where we honored all of law enforcement. We honored the Sheriff's Department, the police, paramedics, firefighters, and they gathered here by the hundreds, and we paid respect to them and their colleagues who fought so well the tragedies that occurred at the Pentagon and around the country and, of course, the World Trade Center. The next year, we had one of the fire trucks that was one of the first responders at the World Trade Center. And it became so damaged that it was rendered ready for retirement. And we got it out here on a flatbed truck. And to look at it, you had a great sense of what happened. We also had 16 tons of steel from both towers. And you could see windows that had been peeled off and fallen all those floors to the ground. A very dramatic presentation. We also had a man who was caught in the elevator that morning and had 10 operations to repair the horrors of his scarred, his burned face and arms and legs. This was his first public appearance, and he came and he told dramatically what actually happened that day. We want to have the fire truck and that steel back here next year. We have tried every year to do something to remember and to observe, because we feel strongly that the way our culture and society ticks, it's easy to forget. And we say never forget, never again. And that comes from knowledge and reminders. A month ago I was at Dachau, my third visit of that German concentration camp outside of Berlin. And what a horrible place to go. But it was packed with people, with students, young people, and I could tell that they were from all over the world by their dress and their language. And it's important that people go see those things and stop and pause and remember, as we're doing today, because that'll help us prepare. The person responsible for preparation here in Orange County is our sheriff. And she was named by the Board of Supervisors in 2008. She was selected from a national field of 45 people from a national search. And she was named because of her extraordinary work with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, which she joined after graduation from Laverne University as a secretary a long, long time ago. And deputies, not really, how could I say that? That is the dumbest thing I could say. I say that about Bruce, but certainly not this young lady. Good Lord. I apologize, I'm sorry. She's our 12th sheriff and the first woman. She is really responsible in Orange County, as she was in Los Angeles, for preparation, for training, for Homeland Security. And she's well prepared for that, having gone through the academy and being trained at the FBI. And she's done an extraordinary job here in her short term. And she'll be back with us, I'm sure, after the election. Ladies and gentlemen, our Sheriff, Sandra Hutchens. Thank you.
Well, I had asked, and I'm not sure if we were able to do it, this is a day of remembrance, and I had asked for some images to be put up here, but if they're not, we can certainly imagine. There they are. The stark images of September 11th, 2001 are forever etched in our collective memory. The images you see before you today are a grim reminder of the devastating personal losses suffered because of the actions of terrorists. Terrorists in the true sense of the word. They have no respect for freedom, human rights, or dignity. I ask that these pictures be shown to you today as I speak in remembrance of September 11th, 2001. Because it is so important to remember the victims who jumped from the windows of the Twin Towers, the victims who died in the plane crash in a field in Pennsylvania, the victims who died at the Pentagon, civilian and military, the victims who ran into chaos and died trying to save a fellow human being, and the survivors, like those of us today who must subject ourselves to these painful images. Images we must never allow ourselves to forget. President George W. Bush expressed that sentiment in a speech he delivered 2 months after the attacks. He said, "Time is passing, yet for the United States of America, there will be no forgetting September the 11th. We will remember every family that lives in grief. We remember the fire and ash, the last phone calls, the funerals of children. All Americans on that fateful day learned the meaning of being vulnerable on American soil. Vulnerable to those who will resort to the most despicable, cowardly means to advance their ideology and attempt to destroy our way of life. Vulnerable to those who resent what we stand for: freedom, liberty, and justice. This was not the first time America has been attacked, but it was the first time many of us felt truly vulnerable in the United States of America. There are many personal reflections on the events of September 11th, and indeed every one of us has a story to tell about where we were on that fateful day when we heard and watched the incomprehensible news. As I was thinking about what I might say to you today, I found a letter that a man in New York wrote to his family and friends in the days following 9/11. And I wanted to share it with you because I think it brings back, at least it did for me, all the things that occurred to me and I felt in those days, the day of September 11th and the days following. It reads, "Dear all, by now you have all heard of the terrible tragedy that has befallen New York City and the United States. I thought I would take a moment to write to you and bring you a first-person perspective on the attacks. First things first, I am fine. I was nowhere near the attack when it took place. In fact, I was actually safe asleep in my bed when the first plane struck the World Trade Center. My alarm clock went off with the news radio informing me that a small plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. I wasn't very awake, and it didn't register with me. But a few minutes later, when I heard that a second plane had hit, I jumped out of bed to turn on the television. My instinct told me something terrible had happened, and this was confirmed when I saw the television footage of black smoke coming from the towers. The reporter said, 'Play the tape back.' And that is when I saw the plane crash into the tower. When I got to my office, I noticed people coming out of the building rather than going up. I decided to head up to the office to use the phones and find out more about what happened. I found 10 messages from friends and colleagues around the world, and I struggled to find out more information about what was going on. A colleague came rushing in to tell me that the World Trade Center was now gone. This hit me really hard, and I felt that something so familiar just couldn't be destroyed. I had just visited on Sunday, and it was something I saw nearly every day. I decided to leave my office in Midtown and walk home. When I saw the news that passenger airlines had been used in the attacks, it made me sick to think of the innocent civilians who were doing nothing more than crossing the country on an airplane ride. It was a truly beautiful day in New York, and no one started this day thinking it would end in tragedy. I watched with shock, anger, and horror as the news reports showed people jumping out of the World Trade Center to escape the flames. These were bond traders and lawyers and janitors and waiters, not exactly military targets. Before I knew it, it was 10 p.m. and I went out for a walk. Nothing was open where I lived. I ended up going home and eating cereal, which would be the only thing I ate for the next 48 hours. The first day was a shock about the loss of 2 buildings and the crash of some airplanes. But by the second day, the stories of survivors and the missing started to appear. I grew sadder and sadder as I heard the stories of the loved ones looking for their husbands, wives, fathers, sons. There were firms in the building that I did business with. There was a former colleague who worked there and is now missing. There were stories of people leaping to their deaths and firemen struggling to save lives while people were dying all around. The next few days were very stressful, more stressful than anything I've ever been through. Suddenly, every problem in my life became insignificant, and my heart was with the victims and the ones left behind. I found myself waking up early in the morning in a panic of helplessness and sadness, the reality of the previous evening coming back with a crushing weight. I felt myself becoming more and more a New Yorker as the city bound together to combat this attack. On Friday, I went to pay my respects to the fire stations that are near my house. At the first station, I lit 2 candles and left some flowers for the men on Engine 54, Ladder 4, just around the corner at 48th and 8th Avenue. Every night I sleep, these firemen would wake me up with the sirens as they drove past my house. Tonight, it was rather silent at the station. This station lost 15 firemen and their ladder truck, which was destroyed in the blast. Because the attack took place around 9 in the morning, the fire departments were changing shifts. Thus, most stations had double the number of firemen, and they all overloaded the fire trucks on the way down to the World Trade Center. A huge pile of flowers and candles covered the driveway, and pictures drawn by local children covered the walls with words like, "Thank you for being brave," and one having a picture showing a fireman catching the people jumping out of the building. One showed a policeman and a fireman standing tall over the city with the caption, "The Twin Towers of the City," referring to the firemen and the policemen's bravery and courage. One sad note at this station was the orphan son of a fireman. He was a little boy about 5, sitting on the bumper of the remaining engine, who told people, "My father likes to save people." Unfortunately, his father has not returned. My next stop was the Family Service Center at the New York National Guard Armory. This was horrible. All around the building were quickly made missing signs with photos and information about people lost. Family members were holding pictures and begging anyone they could find for information about their lost relatives. Some of the pictures were funny. One even showed an elderly man standing next to an elephant. I guess it was the best picture they had of him, but it also helped people remember his name. Other photos were tragic, with pictures of fathers and mothers holding their children. I also noticed one Chinese woman holding her baby, walking around with an anguished face as she handed out flyers of her husband's picture. It was so sad to see this young child who would grow up without a father. I should note that New York is a very strange place right now. It's quiet around town, but there are massive rescue efforts underway that are visible to anyone. On one day, we saw the U.S. naval ship Comfort, a hospital ship now serving as a hotel for the firemen. It sits next to the USS Intrepid, a World War II aircraft carrier which looks small next to the hospital ship. On one day, I saw a convoy of massive digging equipment make its way through Times Square. With a police escort, nearly 15 huge semi-trucks made their way down the road with giant digging equipment on the flatbeds. The license plates were for Wisconsin and Minnesota, likely from the iron mines of Minnesota. Volunteers had driven them all the way from the Midwest to New York with flags and yellow ribbons tied to their trucks. Volunteers are everywhere in town. You see fire trucks from Boston, police from New Hampshire, National Guard units from all over New York. They actually had to ask people to stop coming. They simply had too much help. Saturday started with a visit to Engine 31, down around Times Square and across the street from St. Francis of Assisi Monastery. Father Judge, was the fire department chaplain who lived with the friars and rode with Engine 31 to the fires. His story was incredibly tragic. One of the first firemen to die at the World Trade Center was a young man rushing into the building. A woman who had jumped from the 100th floor landed on the fireman. And Father Judge and the deputy fire chief went to his aid. Seeing that the stricken fireman had already died, the priest took off his helmet to administer last rites. That was when he and the deputy chief were hit by fallen debris and killed. Firemen grabbed Father Judge's body and carried him to a nearby church. They then very delicately laid his body on the altar of the church and went back to deal with the wounded. After the building collapsed, the men of Engine 31 grabbed Father Judge's body and took him back to their station where he would be safe, placing him in their bunk and inviting the priest from across the street to come over to pray. The reverence they showed to Father Judge was something I will always remember when I think about this tragedy. I should also note that Engine 31 lost 6 firemen. We left flowers at this station as well, and then decided to head to the crime scene. New York had been cut in half by the police, and I was unable to get farther south than Canal Street. We ate lunch in Chinatown and then walked down Canal Street east to west. We could see the smoke from this location, but you can see the smoke from nearly everywhere in the city. Fire trucks from the 48th, 58th, 52nd, and 78th Streets in Manhattan responded to the fire. All of these stations lost men and equipment, despite being far away from the World Trade Center. The initial response was 400 firemen, but now some 300 are missing. These were the men who were going up the stairs while civilians were fleeing downwards. Many survivors told us how they applauded these young, brave firemen on their way up to the flames. The scope of this disaster is massive, and the debris covered many blocks, killing many men and women. In talking with friends and friends of friends, these last few days, I've heard many horrible stories. Most gruesome are the accounts of people jumping out of the building to escape the flames. One photograph is of a couple, a man and a woman, jumping hand in hand. Husband and wife, boss and secretary, or just 2 strangers who didn't want to die alone. I'll never know. But as horrible as the people falling from the sky is to see, you have to remember that it also saved lives. A number of people who had evacuated from the building prior to the collapse were milling about at the base of the World Trade Center and in the blocks surrounding. It wasn't until they saw the bodies of the falling victims that they realized this is really bad and started to walk or run away from the building. This action saved their lives, for when the building collapsed, the streets and blocks where they were standing were covered in debris, killing anyone who remained. So, here it is, Sunday night, and I've been trying to go on with my life. They say the best way to fight terrorism is to work hard and get on with life. Maybe this letter is part of that process. I want you to all know that I appreciate your calls and emails. It's nice to know that you care, and I take comfort in knowing you are concerned. I hope you are all remembering the missing in your thoughts and prayers. Thank you for allowing me to read that letter, because I think it really speaks volumes to what occurred on that day and the day following. While this letter evokes the images of that fateful day, it also recounts the incredible heroism and American spirit. 2,977 people were killed in the attacks of September 11th. They include nationals of over 70 countries. The majority were civilians. 55 at the Pentagon were members of the military. It is important that we remember them all, and we will. We will continue to gather year after year after year on this anniversary to keep both them and their families in our hearts. It is important that we continue to be vigilant. A lot of good work has been done to make America safer. First and foremost, I want to thank all of the men and women of the military who spend their days and nights protecting America's freedoms at their own peril and sacrifice. I had the incredible honor, just before I came in here, to meet the Pateno family. Claudio Pateno's father and mother thanked me for being here. They honor me and all of us. It is a wonderful family. Words cannot adequately express how we as Americans appreciate our soldiers' valor and commitment. Speaking for the law enforcement community, we have eliminated the jurisdictional lines that once separated us. As local law enforcement agencies, we work together with our state and federal partners to ensure that we are sharing information, following up on tips and leads, and constantly and diligently scanning the horizon to ferret out those who will threaten our freedom and democracy. In closing, we, all of us here, share in the responsibility that keeping America and our children safe. Part of that responsibility is remembering and giving recognition to the sacrifices of others. We do this to honor our heroes. We do this in stark memory of the unspeakable events of September 11th, 2001. We must, all of us, continue to live our lives in democracy and not in fear, but always be prepared to defend the freedoms we hold so dear. Your presence here speaks loudly of our collective commitment to never, never forget, and to always stand up for this great nation of ours, in which we are all so privileged to live. God bless you all, and God bless America.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We will hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Short. Mike Short's the music director of Orange High School. Thank you very much, Mike, and thanks to the Orange High School Chamber Singers and the Orange Community Master Chorale. You're always extraordinary. Thank you for blessing us with your performance. Ladies and gentlemen, the Nixon Foundation, the Nixon family, has no better friend than Bruce Herschensohn, and it's been that way for decades. Bruce is a senior fellow in international relations at Pepperdine University. He teaches a course called The World Leadership Role of the United States, and I don't know anybody better qualified to do that. For more than 2 decades, he's been a noted and popular television and radio commentator, not only in Southern California, but nationally. Previously, he was the Oscar-winning director of the United States Information Agency and won incredible volume of awards for his good work there. In 1969, he was named one of the 10 most outstanding men in the federal government. Now, that's a distinction. President Nixon named him as his deputy special assistant in the White House. He's taught at Whittier, he's taught at Harvard, and now a respected member of the faculty at Pepperdine University. A very close friend and an advisor to President Nixon. A very good friend of Ed Nixon, President Nixon's brother, and Julie and Tricia, the daughters. Every year he brings us a special message on our observance of 9/11, and I present him for that occasion today, ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Bruce Herschensohn.
Thanks very, very much. When you came in, Sandy introduced you to Ambassador Frank Shakespeare, and I know that many of you know of him. Some of the younger people may not. But I want to say a few words about Ambassador Shakespeare, because I have known him for decades, and during those decades, Ambassador Shakespeare has become my ideal and my idol. Even if he had no resume at all, even if he was unknown by presidents and kings and prime ministers and popes, he would still be my ideal and my idol. And that's because of his character, his sense of values, his total dedication to this nation and all he's done for it, and for his clarity of thought. In 1999, just before the change of the century, there was a conference of brilliant U.S. leaders, including, of course, Ambassador Shakespeare. The speakers were asked by the moderator to give their predictions of what lay ahead for the nation in the coming century. And that was very common practice in 1999. Almost every magazine, every newspaper, every radio show, TV show, there were people giving prophecy on what was to come in the new century, the 21st century. When Ambassador Shakespeare's turn came, and I'm going to paraphrase his answer because he was asked to give a prediction, it was the best prediction that anyone could have made. He shook his head and he said, "I have no prediction. I have no prediction because if the most brilliant minds in the world were gathered together in 1899 to predict what would happen in the coming 20th century, none of them would have predicted, not one, that in the century ahead, the British Empire of some 62 colonies would be willingly reduced to nothing more than a few islands. And the most powerful in the world would be the United States of America. And there would be 3 world wars. The third one lasting over 4 decades, stemming from a country to be temporarily called the Soviet Union. And before 3/4 of the 20th century are to be ended, the United States will land men on the moon. None of the 1899 speakers would have predicted correctly. And so Ambassador Shakespeare said, "No, I will make no predictions." None of the other speakers who did give predictions said one word about the coming horror of 9/11 or the resulting war against Islamic radical terrorism, but it happened. And this century still has 9 decades to go. Your presence here today says a great deal about you and about the character of our nation. To the terrorist enemies of the United States, you are a deep disappointment. Decades back, when I was a kid, there was another commemoration. It was for an anniversary of December the 7th of 1941, commemoration for an anniversary of Pearl Harbor Day. President Roosevelt didn't call for a commemoration. There was no presidential decree or proclamation, nor did he give a speech that day. The commemoration took place all by itself throughout the nation spontaneously. It had to happen. The date was too ingrained to be ignored. At Fairburn Avenue Elementary School that I attended, a marvelous teacher, Mrs. McKinnon, whose first name I never knew. I thought teachers weren't allowed to have first names. Mrs. McKinnon led her class in a memorial observance, and then she led those of us in her classroom in a prayer. It was legal in public schools in those days. It was a prayer. It was a prayer for those who lost their lives at Pearl Harbor. And within that prayer, she requested that God watch over our military. Our boys is what she called them. Then she added something for us in her classroom. She said, I guarantee to you that in the end, America will win. I later learned that at that time, we were losing. Mrs. McKinnon knew it. My parents knew it. Most adults knew it. But in the end, just as Mrs. McKinnon assured us in her commemorative guarantee, we won. Today, Mrs. McKinnon, of course, must be gone. She has to be, I guess. And I'm sure she never expected that in 2010 we'd be here in another observance, commemorating a day of events so immense that it simply can never be absorbed. The doing away of more than 3,000 totally innocent lives murdered in New York and the Pentagon and in Somerset County in Pennsylvania, in a coordinated attack on each one to be an attack on the United States, attacks led by those who worship destruction rather than creation. September 11th is a date so stained that every time it comes on calendars, we are just jolted by the sound of that date. Those terrorists confirmed they're our enemies, and they confirmed their quest is to destroy our citizens, our nation, and to leave liberty buried in ruins, while many in their cities celebrated our sadness. But there's something else about the memory of 9/11, something in total opposition to the traits of the murderers, something that's so worthy, so inspiring, so American that it's now enshrined as a living force in our blood. Absolute heroes emerged from absolute anonymity. They're the ones who fought the blaze. They're the people with the fire department. And they're the people who are police. And they knew they would lose their lives in their attempt to rescue strangers. That is the ultimate morality, in my view, risking life to rescue the life of a stranger. And there were also those passengers in a doomed airliner who gave their lives, ensuring that the target of the murderers would be denied them. The actions of those passengers were meant to save the leadership and the shrines of our nation, and they did. The heroes of 9/11 prove the United States is the home of the brave. And in the 9 years since that date, there are new stories of American heroism daily by those members of the U.S. Armed Forces and intelligence agencies. For 9 years, we've heard some people ask, what is it that makes those terrorists hate the United States? We should search for the deep reasons. That, in my view, is absolute nonsense. The reasons are obvious. Our enemies are primitive and uncivilized and without conscience. They have fallen in love with hate. And that's it. This analysis is done. To search for deeper reasons is to naively exalt the murderers to rank with those murdered, that they both have a case. Those enemies attack citizens and structures of the greatest country in the world. And that conclusion of mine comes not from some blind national pride. It comes from proof. This is my proof, which I learned very early and even before Mrs. McKinnon, I guess. No, it was after. This nation in the world, could have had the world as our taxpayer after World War II. Easy. Others who did that historically did it. They were conquerors. We didn't want any new stars on our flag. But we did exactly the opposite as previous victors did. American citizens gave our taxes to them. We gave our friends and former foes funds to rebuild their nations, and for those former foes to reconstitute their governments to democracies so their people would be free. What other country has ever done such a thing? None. Never happened. But we didn't confuse winning hearts and minds while we fought. We recognize that we can't make them love us while we bomb them at the same time. First, we won, and then came the winning of hearts and minds, not simultaneously. And I believe that's important to remember right now. As more and more distance comes between September the 11th of 2001 and the current, more and more people speak and think of it as past tense, a memory. That's dangerous because it isn't past tense. We're in a war with some front lines known, future front lines unknown. Most Americans living today have only seen wars in which any failure of ours would mean that a friendly state, an ally, could be defeated, and that's bad enough. But in this war, we're fighting so that the United States will be saved. This is a war for national survival, and in a bigger sense, even the survival of Western civilization. Those politicians who say they're going to end the war, who say we're going to get out, those who give timelines for getting out, they ignore the times in wars before this one. Wars are not ended, ever. They are won or they're lost. There is victory or defeat. Those were the deadlines for World Wars I, II, and III as being victories, and so they were achieved. And those are still the choices. We don't have the luxury of rules of engagement in a half-hearted war fought in political correctness. Can we negotiate success with tyrannies? Not a chance. Through the 20th century into this one, negotiations with tyrannical forces have never brought what was signed and agreed. Not Chamberlain in Munich, not the Yalta Agreement with the Soviet Union, not that 38th parallel with North Korea, or the Paris Peace Accords with North Vietnam, or the no-fly zones with Iraq, or the Oslo Accords with Yasser Arafat, or the Advanced Framework Agreement with Kim Jong-il, or the Dayton Agreement with Slobodan Milosevic. Throughout the 20th century, successes over tyrannical forces have been achieved through only one way: insistence of unconditional surrender. There are those who argue back that some people simply don't want to be free, and maybe. But as we found out during the Cold War, there is in almost every person a deep instinct to be free. We found that out by witnessing a one-way avalanche of millions upon millions. They only went in one direction, toward freedom, and they risked their lives to make that journey. from North Korea to South Korea, from East Berlin to West Berlin, from North Vietnam to South Vietnam, from Cambodia to Thailand, from Cuba to Miami, from the People's Republic of China to Taiwan to Hong Kong and Macau, to say nothing of the millions from the Soviet Union and all its satellite governments in Eastern Europe, 2 nations that were free. Whether or when the entire population of the world will be free is, to take a worthy cue from Ambassador Shakespeare, beyond my prediction. To achieve that day, we should never accept the phrase that 9/11 has changed America forever. It better not change America forever. If 9/11 changes our nation forever by Americans becoming content with living in eternal caution, with metal detectors at entrances and concrete blockades in front of buildings, and the search of pockets and purses and being patted down and explosive-sniffing dogs and other anti-terrorist measures, then we're going to be living with radical Islamist terrorism and not defeating it. Then the war will not have been won, but at best a status quo will have been accepted. To win, which is what we have to do, we shouldn't allow America to change forever. The next generation must feel invited into federal buildings, welcomed into them, not having to go through an anguish of entrance. The next generation should know the joy of travel by air, not an ordeal of airports. The next generation shouldn't live with less freedom than we've had. The next generation should have a future even better than our past, when the towers were still there. Perhaps most important is that our nation is the only one that consistently risks and gives lives for the liberty of foreign strangers, for Koreans, Vietnamese, Laotians, Cambodians, Grenadans, Nicaraguans, Kuwaitis, Somalians, Haitians, Bosnians, Kosovars, Afghans, Iraqis. If we perish, who's going to pick up such a mission? There isn't anyone. Someday, there's going to be a September 11 when school children will be in their classrooms stumbling over the words Al-Qaeda and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah and Hamas and Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, and the children will likely spell them wrong, and that's okay, because those names won't have any relevance for them. Then it'll just be history. Just history, because the United States will have long since won. We will have attained total and absolute and unconditional victory, and it's the only way. Like the wise Mrs. McKinnon assured my classmates long ago, we too should guarantee it. We should never allow the lives taken from us 9 years ago to have died in vain. None of them are strangers to us now. The post-9/11 destiny of the United States has to be liberty and international safety for the young generation of Americans, and safety for all Americans yet unborn, and for all the people of the world yet unborn. Those must be the post-9/11 guarantees of the greatest, the strongest, and the most humane nation the world has ever known.
Thank you again, Mike, and your great group of performers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to honor the Patino family, and we not only have the family, we not only have his good friends, we have his car. And when you walk out, you'll see the bright red Chevy Nova. It's parked right in the front, and it's the car that he bought and he wanted and never really got to enjoy. But go out and take a look at it, touch it. I shouldn't say that, but the car true preservationists will be upset, but pay your respects. Not only the family, not only the friends, not only the car, but his fellow Marines. And I'm going to introduce 3 of them right now who are going to make the presentation of the Bronze Star to the family. May I please have Colonel Duff, Major Bundami, and First Sergeant Wynn come forward for the presentation. Thank you.
Military personnel in uniform, please stand. Attention to order. The President of the United States takes pleasure in presenting the Bronze Star Medal posthumously to Corporal Claudio Patino IV, United States Marine Corps, for service as set forth in the following citation. For heroic service in connection with combat operation against the enemy while serving as the sniper team leader, Scout Sniper Platoon, Weapon Company, 3rd Battalion, 7 Marines, Regimental Combat Team 2, 1st Marine Division, forward, 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, forward, Afghanistan, from 22 March 2010 to 22 June 2010, in support of Operation Enduring Freedom during disruption operation in southern Nowzat, Afghanistan. On 22 May 2010, Corporal Patino was attached to a combined anti-armor team which had begun receiving enemy indirect fire when he identified an enemy forward observer on a rooftop 1,000 meters away and set up a hasty firing position. He then engaged the enemy with his weapon, scoring a first round hit and shutting down all indirect fire directed at the combined anti-armor team. His action resulted in the neutralization of enemy fire, allowing friendly force freedom of movement. On 22 June 2010, anti-Afghan forces coordinated an attack on 3rd Battalion, 7 Marines position, at which time Corporal Patino's sniper team observed 2 anti-Afghan forces and placing machine guns. He immediately engaged the enemy, killing 1, and the rest of his team eliminated the remaining force. Knowing that he was at great risk to his personal safety, Corporal Patino aggressively seized the initiative away from the enemy and saved Marines' life, but was killed by enemy fire during the ensuing attack. Corporal Patino gallantly gave his life for his country. By his zealous initiative, courageous action, and exceptional dedication to duty, Corporal Patino reflects great credit upon himself and upheld the highest tradition of the Marine Corps and the United States Naval Service. The combat distinguishing device is authorized. For the President, signed, Joseph F. Dunford, Jr., Lieutenant General, United States Marine Corps, Commander, U.S. Marine Corps Forces, Central Command.
Especially on September 11th, because for your son's bravery, Patrick's ain't coming over here because of his skills, his bravery, and his valor. That's what this award represents, and I'm proud to give it to you.
Please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Our special thanks to the Patino family for coming and letting us honor them, to our speakers, Sheriff Hutchens and Bruce Herschensohn, and to our great performers, Mike Short and your wonderful group, the choir, the community master chorale, and your chamber singers, and to the terrific Villa Park High School concert band. We thank all of you and all of you for coming. Thank you.